Friedrich Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in the small town of Rücken, Germany. His arrival in the world would mark the beginning of a trajectory that would later be considered one of the most brilliant and misunderstood in the history of philosophy. From an early age, he showed exceptional intelligence and a unique sensitivity to questioning the world around him. By the age of 24, he had already distinguished himself as one of the brightest minds of his generation and was appointed professor at the renowned University of Basel, an extraordinary achievement for someone so young. However, despite the opportunities that awaited him in the academic world and an apparently promising future, Nietzsche made a decision that surprised everyone. He abandoned his comfortable position and followed a solitary path. The search for tranquility and intellectual freedom led him to isolate himself in remote regions of Europe, where he could devote himself entirely to reflection and writing. It was during this period of seclusion that Nietzsche conceived some of the most revolutionary and challenging ideas in Western philosophy, ideas that have often been misinterpreted and distorted over time. Nietzsche confronted truths that many would not even dare to consider. He laid bare the beliefs and values that underpinned society, exposing their contradictions and revealing what he saw as the true, sometimes dark, nature of human motivations. This penetrating and challenging vision was undoubtedly one of the factors that led him into a state of even greater isolation, both emotionally and socially. For many, Nietzsche seemed to be fighting an internal battle against the very foundations of reality, a struggle that eventually led him to a mental breakdown. This collapse, however, cannot be dissociated from the extraordinary load of thoughts and ideas he carried. Nietzsche was faced with such complex and disturbing truths that it would have been almost impossible for any individual to bear this weight alone. He was a man who, by unveiling the masks and illusions of existence, directly confronted the essence of society, human nature, and the cosmos in its entirety. Such a confrontation placed him in a state of extreme vulnerability, for there is no greater challenge than to question what, for centuries, has been considered unquestionable. Among his most famous reflections is the disturbing statement, "God is dead, and we have killed him." This phrase, often misinterpreted, was not a direct attack on religion, but a realization about the loss of meaning in traditional value structures in the modern world. Ironically, Nietzsche came from a deeply religious family, being the son and grandson of Lutheran pastors. This background was in stark contrast to the direction his life took, as he began to reject the foundations of Christianity and question the morality it derived from. Nietzsche's life was marked by an intellectual rebelliousness that challenged conventions and traditions. Despite his genius, he found it difficult to connect with people. His books were rarely well received during his lifetime, and he often faced criticism and misunderstanding. Yet he continued to write, believing in the ability of his ideas to transform the way people see life and themselves. At the heart of his philosophy was the idea that life should be lived on its own terms, without relying on unattainable ideals or a utopian vision of the future. For Nietzsche, the present is all we have, and each moment is the result of a complex equation of unique factors. He argued that trying to shape life based on ideal standards is a futile effort, as these standards don't exist in the real world. Instead, he encouraged people to embrace life as it is, with all its imperfections, and to live fully in the present moment. Nietzsche's vision was radical and transformative. He believed that to idealize life was to imprison oneself in a mental cell, creating impossible expectations that would inevitably lead to frustration. True freedom, according to him, lies in experiencing life directly, without filters or judgments imposed by external ideals. For him, living life is more important than simply dreaming about it. When discussing Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the first concepts that usually comes up is that of nihilism. This term, often associated with the philosopher, is often understood in a superficial way, as if it were just a denial of values or an invitation to despair. However, Nietzsche not only explored nihilism, he also profoundly criticized and redefined it, transforming our perception of it. For him, nihilism represented a necessary stage in the process of deconstructing traditional values, but not a final destination. Nietzsche believed that it was possible to overcome nihilism and find new meanings for existence, based not on external ideals, but on a fuller appreciation of life. One of Nietzsche's main criticisms was directed at the way in which, throughout history, Western philosophy and culture often devalued emotions, desires, and sensory experiences in favor of abstract ideals or unattainable perfections. He argued that these ideals, often presented as superior, repressed what is most vital and human in us. For Nietzsche, any idea or value that denied human life, emotions, or instincts was a kind of idol to be unmasked and overcome. The idols in question, according to Nietzsche, can be understood as perfect ideals or absolute values that distract us from living fully. These idols can be found in religious, philosophical, or cultural systems that present standards of behavior and thought that are supposed to be followed to the letter. To better understand Nietzsche's critique, it is useful to compare him to Plato, the philosopher who introduced the famous myth of the cave. Plato argued that we should leave the cave, rejecting our passions and desires in search of a higher light, represented by reason and the ideal. Nietzsche, on the other hand, proposed an opposite approach. He suggested that we should stay in the cave and learn to value the darkness, the shadows, and the sensory experiences that take place there. Nietzsche believed that life should be loved for what it is, with all its imperfections and contradictions. He rejected the idea that only the ideal has value, saying that this kind of thinking leads us to despise life itself. Over the centuries, we have been taught to value only what transcends the material world, as if desires and emotions were irrelevant or unworthy. For Nietzsche, this mentality creates an artificial division between the real and the imagined, trapping us in a cycle of dissatisfaction and denial of life. In addition, Nietzsche also criticized the kind of nihilism that he saw as a direct consequence of idol worship. He described the true nihilist as someone who, in the name of an ideal or an absolute principle, denies reality and their own feelings. This kind of nihilism is not a lack of values, but a surrender to external values that distance us from our own essence. The person who lives according to these values stops living their own life in order to follow a set of rules that prevent them from connecting with their most authentic desires and wishes. For Nietzsche, these idols often take the form of religious or moral models that classify life in terms of right and wrong, good and bad. From this perspective, life ceases to be an end in itself and is evaluated according to external standards. This way of thinking makes us live in constant judgment, whether it's due to society's expectations, idealized memories of the past, or the search for validation on social media and other forms of external comparison. However, Nietzsche didn't believe that we should completely reject religion or ideals, but rather that we should evaluate the impact these idols have on our lives. They can be useful in some contexts, but they can also harm us if we start living according to them. In other words, Nietzsche invites us to reflect on the extent to which these values really serve our interests and desires, or whether, on the contrary, they take us away from the full experience of life. Nietzsche's philosophy, therefore, is an invitation to authenticity and the courage to live on our own terms. Instead of letting ourselves be dominated by ideals that distance us from reality, he encourages us to embrace life in its entirety, valuing every experience, emotion, and desire as essential parts of our existence. For him, true freedom can only be achieved when we let go of external judgments and start living fully in the present, with everything it has to offer. One of Friedrich Nietzsche's most instigating and revolutionary concepts is the eternal return. This idea, which he used as a metric to assess the quality of life, challenged traditional values and perspectives, offering a deeply introspective way of looking at existence. For Nietzsche, the eternal return was not just a philosophical speculation, but an existential provocation. What would it be like to live your life knowing that every choice, every action, would be repeated endlessly in exactly the same way, forever? The essence of eternal return lies in the following question: Would you be willing to relive your life with all its good and bad moments exactly as it was, without changing anything? Nietzsche saw this as the ultimate test of whether we are living a full life or not. If the idea of repeating your life forever seems unbearable, this could indicate that you are living in a way that is disconnected from your own values and desires. On the other hand, if the prospect of reliving every moment seems satisfying, this is a sign that you are living in harmony with yourself and the world. Nietzsche believed that life is good when we wish it wouldn't end, when we are so immersed in the present that time seems insufficient to enjoy everything life has to offer. This view contrasts profoundly with the common behavior of many people who often wish for time to pass more quickly in order to escape unpleasant situations. For him, the key to a good life lies in reducing as much as possible the situations that make us want time to move quickly. This doesn't mean avoiding difficulties, but rather finding purpose and value in experiences, even in challenging moments. The philosophy of eternal return also invites us to reflect on how we live our days. Often we go through life automatically, without thinking about whether the choices we make really bring us happiness or whether we are just following external expectations. Nietzsche challenges us to consider whether the minutes we spend on our daily activities are really meaningful to us, or whether, when we look back, we will regret the time wasted. This reflection is closely linked to Nietzsche's critique of the way we learn to measure our lives by external standards. He observed that society often teaches us to seek validation in goals that are outside of ourselves. Getting the highest mark in a test, achieving a prestigious career position, acquiring material goods that symbolize success. These criteria take us away from what really matters: personal experience, the emotions and feelings that arise in each moment we live. The eternal return forces us to think about the here and now. For Nietzsche, the true reward of an action should not come from something that will happen in the future, but from the intrinsic experience provided by that action at the moment it is performed. This perspective challenges traditional thinking, which often sacrifices the present for the sake of an idealized future. For Nietzsche, living fully means finding satisfaction in the present moment, without depending on future results or promises. Another fundamental concept in his philosophy is Amor fati, or love of fate. This principle reflects a radical acceptance of life as it is, including its challenging and imperfect aspects. Nietzsche argued that we should love not only the good times, but also the difficulties and contradictions, because they are what shape our existence. He recognized that it is not always possible to love everything, but argued that we should make this love of life the rule, not the exception. Fati love is not resignation or passivity in the face of circumstances. On the contrary, it is an invitation to embrace life with courage and enthusiasm, recognizing that it is intrinsically valuable even when it doesn't live up to our expectations. For Nietzsche, this acceptance of fate is what allows us to overcome nihilism and find meaning in a world where there are no guarantees or absolute truths. The philosophy of eternal return and amor fati requires fortitude, both mental and emotional. It challenges us to abandon the search for unattainable perfection and to accept life in all its complexity. Instead of trying to shape the world according to our desires, Nietzsche encourages us to find beauty and value in what already exists, learning to live in harmony with the unpredictable flow of existence. In proposing these ideas, Nietzsche offers us a profound and transformative vision of life. He invites us to question our values, to reflect on our choices, and to embrace life with all the intensity it deserves. It's not a question of denying difficulties or challenges, but of facing them with the conviction that each moment, good or bad, is part of a larger tapestry that gives meaning to our existence. It's important to note that Friedrich Nietzsche never claimed that everyone should follow his philosophy to the letter or that his concepts were absolute truths. On the contrary, he believed that each individual should embrace life in its entirety, accepting their desires and aspirations and seeking to fulfill them authentically without allowing external rules or unattainable ideals to limit their path. Nietzsche doesn't offer us definitive answers, but rather a provocation. Are we really living according to our will, or are we submitting to values that distance us from who we are? The reflection provoked by his philosophy is intensified by a fascinating and challenging image, described in many of his writings and later reinterpreted in literary and cinematographic works. Imagine that a demon appeared before you and declared, "This life that you have lived exactly as you have lived it so far is to be repeated countless times with the same events in the same order for all eternity. Nothing will be new. Everything will be repeated exactly as it was." This is the core of the concept of eternal return, but also an invitation to introspection. How would you react to this idea? Would the prospect of reliving your life eternally be a comfort or a torment? This question brings us face to face with our choices, our actions, and our regrets. The eternal return is not just an abstract theory. It is a mirror that forces us to confront the quality of our lives. It challenges us to consider each moment as if it were eternal, to act in such a way that we can look back without regret. Nietzsche believed that this perspective could lead us to a more conscious and meaningful existence, in which every action is charged with intrinsic value. Another fascinating aspect of his philosophy is his analysis of morality. Nietzsche questioned, who decides what is right or wrong? He saw morality as a human construction, often motivated by what he called reactive force. For him, people driven by this force don't create their own values, but react to those they have the will and power to create. Morality, in this context, often serves as a tool to control and restrict individuals who seek to assert their own uniqueness and authority. Nietzsche divided the world between two main types of individuals. On the one hand, there are those who follow social rules, seeking to fulfill an ideal prescribed by the collective. On the other are those who, despite facing opposition and persecution, assert their individuality and live according to their will. The latter, according to Nietzsche, represent the active, creative force that does not accept the restrictions imposed by inherited values or social dogmas. This struggle between reactive and active forces is evident throughout Nietzsche's life. Despite his genius, he lived an existence marked by isolation, misunderstanding, and suffering. His physical and emotional health deteriorated over the years, and his life culminated in a tragic episode in 1889 in Turin, Italy. At the age of 44, Nietzsche witnessed a coachman flogging a horse in the street. Deeply shaken, he ran to embrace the animal and shouted, "I understand you, I understand you." That moment marked the beginning of his mental breakdown, from which he never recovered. For the last 11 years of his life, Nietzsche lived in an extremely precarious state of mental health, unable to produce any intellectual work and disconnected from the world around him. The causes of his condition remain uncertain, but many believe that the collapse was the result of a combination of factors: the physical and emotional pressures of his intense lifestyle, the weight of his philosophical reflections, and the internal conflicts that accompanied him throughout his existence. Nietzsche's life was marked by loss and tragedy from childhood onwards. He lost his father and brother at a young age, faced tumultuous personal and professional relationships, and suffered from poor health. His rejection of the prevailing norms and values of the society of his time further isolated him, depriving him of meaningful and lasting connections. Despite his brilliance, Nietzsche was first and foremost human, subject to the same pains and limitations that we all face. His philosophy, however, continues to resonate powerfully. Nietzsche bequeathed us a profound understanding of the human condition and an invitation to have the courage to live an authentic life. He reminds us that even in the face of adversity, life deserves to be loved and faced with intensity. His ideas challenge us to question norms, to overcome the fear of being who we are, and to find meaning in the chaos and beauty of the world. Despite his tragic end, Nietzsche's impact on philosophy and culture is immeasurable. His reflections on eternal return, Amor fati, and the creation of values continue to inspire generations to live more fully and consciously. Nietzsche's life was a constant struggle to understand the truth, a battle that leaves us the legacy of a philosophy that transcends time and invites us to be more than mere followers of rules, truly free human beings.